Jonathan. So my panel is here, and they were supposed to be sitting here, but they're all getting mic'd up. So as you guys get here, come on, you guys got it? All right. I'll introduce them in a couple minutes. So a lot of discussions yesterday and even this morning about big data and technology and vendors and partnering and how do you figure these things out. What we want to talk about for the next 30 minutes is, how does this sort of really work? So what's the reality today of big data? What's the reality of our daily lives as a planner, as a buyer, as a vendor, as a partner? And we have three leaders in the space who are going to sort of walk us through sort of the way they look at partnering and the way they're trying to make big data actionable, what really is big data, things like that. So to set up the discussion, we're going to start it with a few slides. And many of us know the famous quote, 50% of my advertising works, I just don't know what 50%. John Wanamaker, retailer from Philadelphia back in, I think, late 1800s, early 1900s, was the one that had sort of been, that's where this quote has supposedly come from. It really is all his fault. We can track everything we've talked about these last couple days related to data, performance, measurement, metrics, back to that question. And for the last 100 years or so, we've been trying to answer his question. What of my dollars are actually working to change behavior, to attract new customers, and to influence people to be interested in in his case, stores' products. So it really is going back to his fault. And this notion of, that we've talked about at iMedia for many years and at every conference we go to in our own companies, is we are trying to deliver the right ad to the right person, the right time, the right value for the right price, with the right outcome. And again, tracking back to Wanamaker. This was Wanamaker's relationship, or supposed relationship, with his agency. It was a one-to-one. It was an agency and a publisher that they dealt with. Very simple. We're not going to give Terry more credit for his chart, so we just pulled a different chart. The reality of today, managing big data, managing programmatic buying, managing digital media, looks a lot more like this. All of us are very familiar with these things. Everyone familiar, I think, with the Gartner hype charts. And I think this is amazing. And I'll take a little bit of time to sort of explain it if you haven't seen it. This is the emerging technology hype cycle. They've done it with various industries. And I've pulled out two of these that I wanted to sort of touch on. One is on the left there, big data, which we're going to get into talking about what that is. And as you see on the bottom of the sort of time, the axis down at the bottom, it talks about sort of the technology trigger. And so this is the rise of something happening in these emerging technologies, some explosion that's taking place that is being sort of hyped. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of press about it. There's a lot of amazing things, a lot of talk about possibilities and how it's going to change the world. And you can see the other things that are sort of on that related to sort of the hype cycle of emerging technologies. But big data is on almost its peak. It's sort of still going up. We're still reading about amazing things that are going to change the world. I think The Economist and other magazines just said that maybe even Time, that the data scientist was the sexiest job out there for 2013. So all of this hype is happening around big data. There was not one on this chart that was related to ad tech. So getting into what, again, John spoke about yesterday and the emergence of these last few years, all the venture capital investment in ad tech to try to get to Wanamaker's question. But I sort of added in where I sort of think subjectively where it is. And I think it's on sort of that downside that's going towards this trough of disillusionment. And why I think that's there is because of what we're starting to see in the press today. Articles all over the place now about how ad tech is not working, it's not helpful, it's commoditizing, the CPM prices are coming down. There's just so much negativity around ad tech these days. And I think if you go back, it just shows that we're coming down into this real trough of disillusionment, yet to get to the other side, slope of enlightenment and plateau of productivity. And so what needs to happen is obviously a lot of commoditization that happens, but there's writing of the amount of investment. There's writing of the number of companies, the number of partners. John spoke about that yesterday, which was going from 1,500 partners or so down to 100, 150 over some number of years. What happens to those 1,000 companies or 1,000+ companies? that Group M was working with, right? They're very much sort of squeezed to figure out what we do. We find a lot of pivots, a lot of turns in smaller companies, and then obviously some of the big partners become more and more successful. So getting to this plateau of productivity is good for all of us. That will help the business, but it does sort of beg the question of what happens to those companies that are not going to be on the other side. So an example of this, again, the reality of what's happening in big data today, and again, programmatic buying. We'll talk about a number of things related to big data, measurement, et cetera. But one of the things I was struck by was, in the last few months, all the press related to the non-human traffic, how it's grown. And this, again, this was, I think, from Nielsen or ComScore, 500% since 2011. And one of the thoughts about why that is sort of the bots out there today are able to sort of really understand what metrics. We talked a little bit about this earlier too. Alan did about measurement. But because now we're looking for new metrics, you know, dealer locator, and I'm going to pay somebody to drive somebody to a dealer locator page, or other metrics that aren't necessarily checking people out or people buying products, those are very easy for bots to copy and the fraudsters to copy, these other metrics. Let me show you an example of what we found in terms of this sort of fraud, this non-human traffic growth. December 2010, this is clusters of URLs that have over 50% shared traffic. And if you think about YouTube and New York Times, generally they've got about 50% overlap in traffic. Makes sense, right? 50% of us are on New York Times. They're both massive sites, they're both important, and that's sort of generally what you'd see. The cluster in the middle there, where there's a little bit brighter red, those are sites that are well over 50%. So basically what we're seeing in 2010 was some of these sites are just being built to move and shepherd traffic around back and forth to each other and monetize without anybody knowing. What looks like that today, July 2012, look at the explosion, what's happened in this sort of URLs and browsers being sent back and forth to various sites within, again, the digital space, within the big data space. So there's obviously reasons why we're starting to see that dip in terms of confidence in what ad tech does and what should be doing. So I wanted to introduce the panel. We're going to talk about all these things. We're going to make it, you know, what is real? What are the expectations of big data? How do you make it actionable? First, we've got Paul Pellman, who is the CEO of Adometry. He's closest to me here. Leading attribution analytics company. Previously, Paul was venture capitalist, president of Hoover's. Last night I found out he was anybody from the University of Arizona here? One, two. Paul actually was your mascot when he was at University of Arizona. He was the Wildcat. What was his name again? Willie?
Wilbur.
Wilbur the Wildcat. And he'll tell you about how smelly the head is that he had to wear if you have interest. Next to Paul is Julian Zilberbrand, who's a SVP of Digital and Strategic Partner in Technology Solutions at Starcom Mediavest. And he's been there a long time, a really long time.
Really long time.
Eight plus years. So again, so thinking about what the agencies, think about 8 years from what Julian has seen and been a part of at Starcom with the rise of big data. How do you make it actionable for his wealth of clients? And then on the far side is Ming Wu, who's the general manager of Accuen. Most of you know Accuen is the trading desk for the Omnicom Media Group. Previously, he's done the startup thing. He was a few years at Yahoo, and even in management consultant before that. So again, a wide view of sort of what he's seen, and we'll be able to sort of shed some light on across many of those roles to what now is running a big trading desk, programmatic buying, et cetera. So to get into some questions here, let's just start. Actually, I was thinking about this. I don't know if we all understand what big data means. Is big data just a new name for data? Is it just that we have lots of it? So why don't we just, across the way, sort of describe what you guys think of big data?
Sure. Big data reminds me back in business school of the word synergy. And we used to have case studies where we were not allowed to say that word. And so I think big data is kind of taking on that that kind of context now in the industry. Everyone's talking about it. What's it mean, though? My perspective, what it means is it really is about the promise, at least as it relates to digital media. You have all the data. You know every URL, every impression served, every click served. And so I just think as an industry, we've not been able to harness and leverage that data as effectively as possible, and I think that's the aspect. That's what I connote big data. Just having all the data in one place in and of itself isn't really valuable. What's valuable is how you harness that to create insights so you can make better decisions, and I think that's my perspective of what that means.
Julian, similar, a little different?
Yeah, I mean, Paul's a really intelligent man because that's clearly the case. So I'll give you a two-pronged answer. So the first one is exactly what you said, which is it's just another name for data. I mean, it's another way that we can create press or make ourselves feel special by putting big in front of it. I think the other side of it is how you might define it, right? It's the variety of metrics that we have, the volume of data that we're having in terabytes, the ability to process and manage it, and ultimately the ability to scale and use it, right? So that to me is what I would, I guess, consider big data if I was talking to the press.
Well, you are right now.
There you go.
Ming.
So very well said, I think, both on the technical front and on the, how I think about it, Paul, to your point, it is kind of like synergy, but also it represents infinite possibility. What are you going to do with all of this data that Penry just showed on a previous slide? How are you going to solve a business problem? And I think that's what's important. You can probably use 0.5%, 0.1% of that data to do something amazing for your client. And I have a couple examples which I can go into later, but I think you almost need to not get caught up in all the fancy analytics and data science and what it can do for you.
So in trying to bring it to a little more sort of reality, what's happening today, Ming, we'll go from your end coming back this way. Trading desks, data partnerships, big data, all these things. How do you manage, how do you find partners? How do you sort of look at partnerships from a trading desk perspective today?
So again, to my last point, it's about what really matters. And in the beginning, you don't know what data is going to matter for which client. You have a wide spread of different needs, different stages of relationships you have with those verticals. And so we try to take as much as we can that we can still manage, and we think that's plenty. So I'll give you one quick example is we had a client who we won from another agency, and in onboarding them, they told us this is who our target market is. This is who we think buys our product. And so through big data, we analyzed who we were marketing to across their entire digital buy, direct buys and through our trading desk. And we found that the target customer that they thought they were trying to reach wasn't actually their customer at all. In fact, 75% of the people who bought and converted to their subscription service on the site were actually of the exact opposite nature that they asked us to target. So we quickly changed that in 90 days, and they saw a 40% lift in the first 90 days of coming over to Omnicom just because of that. Mm-hmm. And it was very simple data. It was who's in the market for this versus who's doing this with their life.
No, just Paul, to sort of go off of Ming's quote or thought there, measurement, right? So
right.
Key for your company, obviously, what you're thinking. What does measurement look like in the future? How do we sort of tackle big data about not knowing what's the important data you're looking for? Everybody thinks more is better. How is measurement going to change with big data being the...
Well, I thought the thing Ming said that was really interesting is how they distilled it down to something that's actually a really simple metric. And that's really the challenge. When you have all this data, it's how do you pull out of that the key insights that allow you to make better decisions. And Ming gave a great example of that as it relates to the audience that you're targeting. I think our perspective is a little bit complementary to that. We tend to look at all the stream of media that your users are seeing. What aspects of that media stream are actually driving people to convert? So you might know that, I always use Nielsen's Prism cluster, not that there aren't others, but cul-de-sac soccer moms. If you want to reach cul-de-sac soccer moms, that's great. You could target them all day long using the 20 million cookies that Nielsen has available. But if you're an advertiser buying 1 billion impressions a month, that's not going to help you reach your audience as effectively. So you have to understand, okay, if I know that the target is cul-de-sac soccer moms, of all the media I'm buying, what does the most effective job of ultimately getting those cul-de-sac soccer moms to convert? So it's almost a yin and yang thing is from what Ming said. You got to understand your target audience, then you got to go back and say, what aspects of my campaign do the most effective job across the stream of media people see, doing that, and doing that in a way that's simple to understand or insightful to understand. That's the real challenge.
And Julian, what about, if you think back to what was talked about before related to partnerships, with media agencies, big data or technology vendors, a lot of black box solutions. How do you, as sort of somebody looking after technology solutions, I would imagine sort of thinking of how do you sort of show the Starcom Mediavest group anyway, these are the partners we want to work with. How do you sort of go through that process to understand what all these solutions provide to you?
Well, it's an iterative process, right? So you have to take the time to meet with companies. You have to take the time to evaluate the technologies, compare them side by side, do some of the things that actually, and I'm going to give John another plug as if he hasn't gotten enough, in terms of evaluation criteria that you're going to use to determine whether or not this fits the need, right? And if you have large subsets of clients, right, which are the tools that are going to surface the insights and the data that make sense for this client, right? So you don't simply evaluate tools and go, all right, I've seen 10 companies and I label them 1 through 10 and that's who we're going to work with. In many, many cases, there are individual scenarios that make sense, or I should say individual products that are going to make sense for a subset of clients. And you try to do an evaluation based on the fact that these companies are going to fit the needs of what this client KPI is trying to do. So you're going to go through that process, you're going to meet with these companies, you're going to get deep inside and actually see the tech, right? So I think a lot of times when companies come in and they sell a product, not enough people actually go inside and actually look under the hood. And you have to look under the hood. You have to understand how things are working, how they're managing this information, how they're surfacing it, so that you can effectively evaluate it and then recommend to your client or your client teams which are the best tools for them to use. And it's an iterative process, and it takes an extensive amount of time. And I mentioned on the panel that I did yesterday, I think you have to have individuals within your organization whose function it is to do that.
Mm-hmm. What about sort of going to the Gartner chart hype? Where are we in this sort of big data phase? That's the way sort of Gartner has put it there. But what about from a client perspective first? How are clients thinking about this? Are they taking advantage of it? How do we get more of them interested in this? What do they need? There's obviously these fraud issues, but then there's also other incredible opportunities around measurement and really effectiveness. So where are we in the cycle of clients adapting to this new world? I'll start Ming down there with you.
Sure. I mean, what we're seeing is that clients are being bombarded by sales pitches about big data. So we had a really bad flu season this year. I think we all know somebody who's been sick in our office. So if you're selling cold remedies, who do you want to target? Do you want to target people who have families maybe and they have young children? Or do you want to target people who have a stressful job, maybe above a certain income level? Or do you want to use weather information, which we can do today, and tie in when a cold storm comes through your region and you want to heavy up in that area? Well, that's all big data, and everybody's making their own pitch. Or maybe a completely tangential but equally important topic is, what about viewability and attribution? These are all large big data problems, and you could choose to solve any one of them, and I think clients are really looking for guidance. And so as the agency, I think that's a huge opportunity to really understand, work with the partners that you know you can trust, and take a few of those recommendations and see if it impacts your client's bottom line.
And why are you, Julian, why do you think clients, again, it sounds like from Ming's perspective, clients are starting to think about this, but other reasons you think they may be sort of holding back and not ready to jump into either programmatic buying, again, specifically there, but just utilizing and sort of understanding what big data can do for them?
I think, really, I think they're just simply intimidated, right? Intimidated by not understanding how to use the data, intimidated by the data itself, intimidated by being told that the models that they're used to doing and the things that have quote unquote worked for them over the years need to evolve. And I think that there's a wide range of clients that are incredibly aggressive, who understand how to use data, who either have internal systems or through the agencies or using systems and platforms, surfacing that data and then leveraging it. And then you have other clients that really feel that they don't need that much information. It's maybe too complex, and functionally they're just not ready to do it. Now, I think it's our responsibility, as Ming said, as an agency to continue to work towards the best interest of the client and make sure that they at least have the information available to them to make the decisions that are right for them. Now, at the end of the day, you can't force somebody to use something, as much as sometimes you might want to. But I think you have the responsibility as an organization to surface that information to them, to try to convince them to adapt to the marketplace, and to make the moves that are right for them. And again, that's a really wide scale, top to bottom.
Yeah. And Ming mentioned attribution, which clearly is something Adometry is working on. What is, the way that we have a lot of practitioners in the room related to they're going to go back to their desks this week and understand they've got digital campaigns they're running, managing, reporting on. How should they look at measurement? What are the questions they should start to be asking related to the campaign's success today?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of caveats. So first, if you're working with an advertiser that is relatively small, attribution only works for a certain type of client. You need to have a lot of multi-touch conversions. In other words, a lot of users, a good share of your users, see many media elements before they convert. If most of your conversions are single-touch conversions, then last event attribution is multi-touch. Cross-channel attribution should be kind of self-evident. So there are aspects about knowing what's right for what client. I think it ties a little bit what Julian said. It's not for everyone. I do think as we move, at least within the attribution space, we look more beyond just online and start looking at offline as well, which is a whole different topic. That starts to actually add more what clients can do, because you definitely have a lot of advertisers that, while they might spend quite a bit on digital, it's still a very small percentage of their total media spend, or their media spend online is driving very soft conversions, or they can't really track conversion activity, so they're really just more interested in kind of reach and frequency to certain demographic targets. Those folks aren't good choices for attribution. But if you're tracking a hard metric and you're doing a lot of advertising online today, then attribution is just going to be a more accurate way of measuring performance. And it should be something you look at. I think my perspective for those types of companies or those clients that you have, if your client's not using attribution and your competitors are, it's kind of like stepping up to a poker table. And if you don't know who the sucker is, guess what? You're the sucker. And so if you're not using attribution and your competitors are, they know what's really working, and you don't. So you're stuck buying all that inventory, or you're going to be buying all that inventory that looks really good on a last event basis that's actually really not performing. And you're going to wonder why your results are going down where your metrics are telling you you're still doing well. So it's those kind of things I think you need to look at.
So we're going to, I have one last slide that I was going to put up, but I do want to open it up we got about 7 or so minutes in case there's some questions. But I want to run through this last little slide. We talked before the group about some questions that you guys could actually take home. Sometimes we all come to these panels, conferences, we write things down. These are some of the questions that we thought about that would be helpful. We said to get promoted or actually to keep your client. To what Paul was just saying about you don't want to be the sucker at the poker table. And I'm not going to go through all these, but there's sort of 7 questions that you can get home and ask yourself on your media campaigns or working with your media partners to make sure that you are thinking along the lines of utilizing the opportunities that these guys have sort of outlined related to big data and the transformative powers it will have related to finding customers, converting customers, and talking to customers. So are there any, first off, before we go back, one more question. Are there any questions out there?
Doesn't look like yet.
Not yet? Okay. So one final question that I had then was, we'll go all the way down the line. What, for next year, we're all going to be sitting at the same thing, maybe not, but what is going to be this topic? Hopefully it's not named big data, it sounds like. We hope that we've moved on. But what is going to be the discussion related to the actionability, what's the year looks like, what does the year look like as we look backwards about what happened in this industry related to big data, the access of it, the measurement of it, the use of it. What are the success stories? Again, you mentioned, Ming, about maybe some clients that you've seen sort of use this and sort of see success. What are the things you got to look back and say it was a great year because we now have done these things?
Well, I think it's a huge opportunity. If you go back to that, was it a Gartner chart or the hype curve? And you're going to get into that trough of disillusionment. But there's going to be a few people who help get out of that. And those are going to be the leaders. It's going to be you and your clients. And the few wins that you can take back up on stage and say, here's what we did with that data. And I would guess, and I wish I had the crystal ball, but I would guess it's going to be very simple things like what we did. It wasn't hard at all. It just stared you in the face that you were going after the wrong audience, and therefore you're wasting your media money offline and online. And that was a huge win for the client. I think that we have lived in this, I mean, we all have brand study firms out there. We have brand science at Omnicom, and they're dealing with a form of big data. It wasn't as big as it is today, but it's big, right? And understanding the optimal media mix, no one's ever solved that, really. And all we've done is throw more data into it. So there are more opportunities, but as I said in the beginning, I think it's a fraction of a % of the data that's going to help you. And those of us here that help get out of that trough of disillusionment, I think you'll start to see those rays of hope.
And we talked just quickly about your sort of examples of wasted impressions that you were able to sort of expose and find through some of your own partnerships that were eye-opening to your Omnicom partners that were outside of Accuen. So I think educating more within our own organizations is going to obviously be a big part of this year too.
I think those are, we have another client who thinks they're trying to conquest from other brands to the left and to the right of them. And when we looked at the data, the people who are interested in their product are actually above. They're buying at the next price point, the luxury brands. They're trying to buy that. They can't afford it, so then they settle for our client's product, which is great, but they need to be marketing there. And that again, took all of a few days to find out.
Julian?
So I'm going to build on what he said, which is I think more brands, more clients, more agencies are going to be able to surface the data, right? But I think the key is not necessarily just surfacing just a shit ton of data that you can look at and not use. It's understanding how to surface data that is relevant for the user base, right, within your organizations, right? So your media planners get surfaced X data. Your analytics people get surfaced Y data. Your operations people get surfaced Z, and so on and so forth, right? So it's partnering with platforms and systems that are out there, like, attending here. It's, companies like Paul's. It's understanding how to use that information, and most importantly, it's really providing information to the people in the way that they can actually use an action on it, right? And it's things like Ming said, where it really is small bits that are really relevant for a subset of people within your organization. And understanding as a business how to get that information in the right hands of the right people so that they can better perform for your clients is ultimately, I think, where we're going to start seeing a lot more visibility in the coming years, right? We have better tools that are out there. I mean, we're not there, and there's still certainly work to be done, but I think that there are better tools out there than there were last year and the year before, and I think there's going to be progressive increased investment in making the technology usable, which I think is one of the problems with a lot of ad tech. It's just not usable from a UI perspective, but making that usable, making that actionable, and then being able to ultimately hit your KPIs that you're trying to reach with your clients.
That's great. A question out here, I guess?
Sure. Gina Lee with IMM out of Boulder, Colorado. So I think we can all agree and understand that we need to find the right partners and technologies for figuring out attribution and how to analyze the data. Do you have any practical advice about the vetting and onboarding process? Because to date, at least with our agency, it feels like it takes a long time to pull in the data, use it within the tool, and actually get under the hood to see what people are doing. It's hard to know what questions to ask up front until you see it actually working.
So I'll put out a question to you. Do you have people in your organization that have that skill set, right? To understand, the questions to ask, to understand if you're going to open the hood of the car, what am I looking at, right? If I open the engine, I know where the cylinders are, the pistons, et cetera. So do you have those people in your organization? And if you don't, you should, right? And I think that will help speed up your process. It's when you don't have the right personnel who understand what questions to ask and what the evaluation criteria should be, is where you have a really now long drawn out process. So if you don't have that, I think that's step one.
Gina, it sounds like you got to hire somebody. It's you.
Well, that's a problem, right? I mean, that's the simple problem, right? You have other roles, and you really do need to have somebody that's specialized, to a degree at least, that can focus on that.
The other? We didn't get to.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear, given what Alan said in the last panel, how you thread the consumer through the conversation. And so, Julian, as the hub of the hub and spoke, actually thinking about how you thread data for clients so that they still see the customer in the story. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, it's all about the customer, right? You know, whether you're trying to sell or just create a brand image or whatever you're trying to do, right? You're trying to reach that consumer. And all the ways that you're using data, that's only to get to consumer insights and, you know, again, a conversion, whatever that conversion is. Right. So, you know, whether you're using, you know, an attribution tool or a data management platform or whatever it is, right? At the end of the day, you're doing that to get consumer insights or to get consumer results. So everything we're doing, right, is all about the consumer. Whether or not we have to say it, I mean, at the end of the day, right, we're all trying to sell something, so.
Any more questions?
I think, any more questions?
Great.
I think
Thank
we're
you
set.
so very much.
Thank you, and let's thank the panel for their effort. Great job.
Good stuff.